Welcome to Evernear. Thanks for being here with us. Today you got me, Davis, the Huge, and we got a new face over here. Who are you?
I'm Kevin.
Kevin. Perfect. So we're going to be actually discussing today something that some people might think it's a little touchy. That's up to you whether you think or not. But we're going to be talking about chastity. So, and with this, like when you're looking at members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have something called the law of chastity. So we're gonna be going into that. Before I kind of throw a question at you, do you have any like opening things you want to say, or should I just throw a question at you?
I love this topic. I think that this is something that I wish we would talk about more often, more completely, and that we wouldn't shy away from it, because I think that there can be a lot of misinformation sometimes, and a lot of because of that misunderstanding. And I'm not going to pretend like I understand the law perfectly. I'm still learning like everybody else, and trying to live it like everybody else. That does have at least some understanding or some desire to try to come in line with it. But anyway, I just am glad we're having this conversation, because I think that there's lots of room for us to grow in our understanding and our appreciation that this is an amazing gift from God.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I definitely know that there can be misunderstanding because people do kind of shy away. They're like, it's taboo almost, right?
Yeah.
I remember, and this is something I saw on like a video, like a missionary video when I was getting trained to be a missionary. They showed how badly someone taught the law of chastity, and like these missionaries were talking to this guy, and they are very dodgy. Like they're not being specific at all. Like at one point they're just like, and this guy, he broke it. He broke it. And like that's all they say. And you see like this guy who they're teaching it to, they talk to him a couple days later, and he's like, I saw this girl and I wanted to talk to her, but I resisted. I did not go talk to her because I'm trying to keep the law of chastity. I'm just not even talking to any girls, just like kind of like we're talking about. And they're like, wait, what? You can talk to girls. Yeah. And it's just, there's definitely can be some misunderstanding if it's not taught clearly. I mean, like I know for me personally, of course, like there's stuff you learn in church and all of that, but I was never directly talked to, even by my parents. Like we never really talked about it at all. So it's like I didn't really know. Like I didn't even know, for example, till I was like, I think 15. I was talking to my bishop, and he's just, we were doing like a recommend to go to the temple, and he's just like, so do you keep the law of chastity? Do you stay away from like masturbation and pornography? And I'm like, wait, that's part of it? So there's definitely can be some misconceptions. So I guess that'd be a really good place to start, is just kind of like how, without going for 20 minutes, what is the law of chastity?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And certainly you're right. There can be a lot of nuance to this, but I think simply the idea is that God has designed that the powers of procreation are to be employed only between man and wife, lawfully married, and that those sexual powers and that sexual relationship is to be kept within a covenant marriage, right? A committed marriage. And that's like the basic definition. But there's also, I think, this concept, not just that, because what about somebody who is not married? How do they keep the law of chastity? And so it's not just this idea that we're saving those feelings and the sexual powers, the sexual relationship for marriage, but it's also learning how to channel those powers. So it's not just keeping them in the right place, But I think that idea of chastity, you have that same root in the word chasten, right? Which is, so there's this idea of disciplining, or sometimes in the scriptures it talks about the idea of bridling, right? Mm-hmm. So with the bridle on a horse, you're not trying to kill the horse.
Yeah.
You're not trying to destroy its strength, or to even break it of all of its spirit, right? But rather you're trying to channel that power into a way that's going to be useful and productive, that allows the horse to reach its full potential, with some guidance that can be a benefit not only to the horse but also to the rider. And I would say that there's some parallels there. That's Alma's phrase to his son, bridle all your passions that you might be filled with love. Mm-hmm. And so it's this idea that we're not trying to kill the passion, right? This is a God-given gift. It's something that is the highest manifestation of God-like power that he gives to mortals here on earth, which is the power to create another person.
Yeah.
And that because it's such a tremendous power, right, to bring another being into the world, that there's going to be some careful laws, right, that govern that. And all of those laws maybe together would be called the law of chastity. So all those guidelines that God gives us, all that counsel that he gives us. So anyway, that's what I would say a little bit about the law of chastity. Is it something that we're trying to do, is to just use that power in the way that God set it up to be used.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And there's a couple things you said that I kind of want to jump onto and like go further with them.
Sure.
But I guess before I do that, before I go to out in one direction, so I'm gonna say a few things, and if you think there's anything to add or whatnot, just I'll ask you and tell me.
Sure.
But I think it's also kind of important. Like everything you said, I liked it. I agree with it. I think it's also important to kind of give some, what would you say, guidelines, I guess? Maybe there's some specifics too. Because, so for example, like with me, I kind of mentioned, I didn't even know some of the things that were part of the law of chastity. So it's like, the way I've kind of started to see it now, and this is the very nuts and bolts of it. This isn't necessarily the spiritual part yet.
Sure.
The very nuts and bolts of it, it's no sexual relations with anyone outside of marriage. So sleeping around, having sex with people you're not married to, that'd be against the law of chastity. If you're lusting after people, like you're engaged in pornography and masturbation, that's not being chaste either. And those are kind of the main things I see as part of it, or at least the do nots part of it, is just not to sleep with anyone you're not married to, and not even to have sexual relations with yourself. That's not okay either. You're not married to yourself. So at least I don't think that's possible, but so that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of like the do nots. Is there anything else you would like add or say about that?
No, I think you're right. Obviously it's saving those feelings and the sexual part of who you are for your partner that you can be absolutely committed to. But, that's the way that sometimes plays out is it seems like the Savior says that breaking the law of chastity starts first in our mind and in our spirit. That it's not just abstaining, from sexual relationships outside of marriage, but it's also having purity of thought, letting virtue garnish your thoughts unceasingly is one way to say it. In more simple terms, we could say something like, that I'm not going to be thinking with lust, like desiring somebody else, not dwelling on thoughts where of a sexual nature as pertaining to somebody else, and abstaining from that. Jesus says, don't suffer these things to enter into your heart and your mind, and that's a higher law. It's not easy. It's like incredibly difficult. And but yet there's a great blessing that comes from it. Like I think even in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, blessed are the pure in heart.
Yeah.
Which pure in heart, I think when you see that in the scriptures, it's going to be repeated throughout Scripture. But the original language suggests it's pure in mind. Blessed are the pure in mind, for they shall see God. There are going to be things that are going to be open to your view. There's going to be knowledge that you're going to be able to gain and blessings that you're going to be able to obtain as you endeavor to start channeling this great power and keeping it within the bounds that God has set.
Good, I like that. So I kind of want to go off of that, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, is just like the direction. Because I really like that analogy of like the bridle and the horse. It's not like you're getting rid of it, you're just directing it.
Yeah.
Because really, like, sexual relationships, like you said, it's actually a gift from God. It's when we're involved in bringing life into this world, it's one of the times in this life we're going to be the closest to what God is, bringing life. It's very, very important. It's I would even say it's sacred. That is kind of what I want to look at, because I think lots of people, especially Christians, and I would probably say even more especially members of our church, like members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we can get this, again, like this misconception that it's all bad. We need to be like celibates our entire life. Like, obviously, because I had this a lot where it's like people are telling you suddenly to get married at a certain point, but for the first 20 years of your life, it's like, don't think about it, don't flirt with it, don't touch it. Just like, it's evil almost, is kind of the feeling that I got, and lots of people have got. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, it switches, and they're like, go get married, go get married, go get married.
Yeah.
And it's like whiplash almost. Yeah, it's kind of hard because it's such a drastic difference. And I don't think that's intended. I don't think that's intended, especially like the church doctrine. It doesn't say anything about like that it's evil to love and be with someone you're married to. But I think personal opinion.
Sure.
I just think in the church, we need to teach it more clearly, better, because a lot of people I've talked to have kind of gotten that same idea that like, people don't teach about how beautiful it is when you're married as much. More they teach about the don'ts, especially to younger people. It's always the don'ts. It's not like, when you're married, this is going to be amazing. It's a sacred thing. I never heard that. It was always just, stay away from it. Yeah. Don't do it.
This isn't something we talk about. This isn't something that we, discuss. This is, this is something that is just, stay away from this with a 10, as far as you possibly can, right?
Yeah.
Keep this just in the distance, and at some time, maybe you'll understand, but
yeah,
it's almost like this, there's like this veil or shroud of like, you're not going to penetrate this, and don't try, because, this, and it can even have this connotation, because, like, if you do, this is going to corrupt you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of, I'm curious, like, for you, I don't know how many kids you've raised or how you've taught them or anything. Obviously, I haven't talked to you a lot.
Sure.
But I'm curious, like, for you, because you said you like this topic, that you think it should be talked about more. It's like, how do you think we can kind of bridge that divide where it's like, we're not suddenly whiplashing these people who are coming into marriage age because their whole childhood they've just been told don't, stay away, stay away, stay away. Like, how can we kind of bridge that divide where they know how important it is and how beautiful it is, rather than just, it's evil until?
Yeah.
How do we like bridge that divide, do you think?
No, it's a fantastic question. I think at least one of the first places, and there's probably lots of good answers to that question, but one of the first places that I think that we start, and to kind of answer your question a little bit, so I have 8 children. We're in the middle of raising them. Some are young adults. We have them all the way down to 6. So we're still in process. We're still learning. I'm by no means an expert on this. And you recognize that because every time you start to try to help one of your children, you recognize that they're so different. And whereas you may have had some experience with one child, it doesn't mean that that always translates perfectly to another. And so you begin again and again in learning as a parent. And certainly, I just think, my parents were, that same boat where they were trying to figure things out. And I remember sometimes we call it the talk.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the first problem. That it's a talk and it's kind of awkward and it's kind of like uncomfortable. No one wants to be involved in it, the parent or the child. And you go away just kind of feeling, what was that? And it wasn't necessarily comfortable or good and so to overcome that, I feel like we need to change it. And I'm not the first one to suggest this, but I think lots of people that have thought carefully about this say we need to have talks. And lots of them. And they should be in depth enough to really convey the beauty and the sacredness of sexual intimacy within marriage. And so one of the first places that my mind goes is first off to define what intimacy actually is, because I think that's the first problem. Is when we say intimacy, many people will immediately go to, sexual intimacy or physical intimacy. And that's definitely a really beautiful and wonderful aspect of intimacy, but you would be shortchanging yourself to say that is intimacy, in its fullest expression. And so there's lots of different kinds of intimacy that people recognize. There's work intimacy, there's crisis intimacy, there's conflict intimacy. When we say work intimacy, what I mean by that is working at something, doing a project together, or trying to accomplish something together with another person. This doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of marriage, right? You can have coworkers that you can have great work intimacy with. Like you're working at something hard, you can grow closer together. And that's the basic definition of intimacy, is this closeness in human relationships. With crisis intimacy, it might be that you're going through something extremely difficult together, right? But yet, because of the way you're approaching it together, it bonds you, right? As an example, my wife and I, in bringing the children into the world that we have, we lost some children along the way, through miscarriage. And that for us was a crisis. You know what I mean? It was a crisis of health. It was a crisis emotionally. There's a financial burden that comes with that, with some of the healthcare costs and so forth. And anyway, it was very difficult. But I felt like that as we tried to turn to each other, and more importantly, turning to God together, that bonded us. And there was a closeness that I don't think you could get any other way than through going through that crisis together. There's other more positive ones in the sense that aesthetic intimacy, creating something together, or being out in nature together. There's all these different, and you can name them different things. And so yes, there's physical intimacy, right? And those, but then there's all the other intimacies. And I think when God says, I created intimacy to be within marriage, right? So like sexual intimacy, he intended it to be in the context of all other intimacies. And sometimes what happens is when we have the talk, we relegate that talk to physical intimacy, when there's really at least 3 major dimensions of sexual wholeness, right? And great researchers like Jason Carroll at BYU would talk about this, and one of the models that he uses is that there is spiritual, emotional, and physical intimacy, right? That he's talking about, and there's like a spiritual side to sex, right? There's an emotional side and a physical side, but all 3 of those are super important. For Latter-day Saints, we would say something like that there is meaning and purpose that comes with the spiritual side. You need to know like that this actually is like an important part of a larger plan. And so did you need something, sweetie? Okay, if you're gonna stay here, you have to be absolutely quiet. You can't say anything, okay? All right, go shut the door. It's part of the talk. No, but this idea that there's like the spiritual aspect, that there's a spiritual completion that happens, like with us and God, with us and our spouse, when there's physical intimacy within marriage. That's what it's designed to do. Mm-hmm. That it becomes, like, as some others have said, a sacrament, right? Yeah. And that there's an emotional completion that happens. You know, that this is supposed to bond us emotionally. You know, that's one of the things that we would emphasize, I think, and this is in our handbook of instruction, that physical intimacy has two major purposes. One is for the creation of children, right? To bring other souls here to earth, to let other people have this earthly experience that God designed for all of his spirit children, right? Mm-hmm. And that provides them a body and a family and, you know, this opportunity. That's the first major purpose. The second one is to express love between husband and wife in a way that, again, is meant to complete all of those intimacies and bring them all together in one. But that happens within the context of marriage. Marriage is designed to bring all of those intimacies together, culminating with physical intimacy. And if we ignore those other intimacies, so for example, if you have just two people that are in a marriage and they're not close in any other way, they're just like living like roommates, you know what I mean? And they just do their own thing, mm-hmm. and they're not close in any other, but they just come together for sex, right? For physical intimacy, they're missing out. Yeah. They're missing out on what they could enjoy. They don't have that spiritual element where God now can come into it, right? Where their spirits, there's like a bonding and a binding together, and the emotional side of it. And then even there's enough social science to say that even the sexual satisfaction goes down, right? That it's not the same when you don't have this other part, right, of this reality that is being played out. So I guess what I'm trying to say is and this has been a long answer, but I think it's important. We need to have the talk, but we don't want to just talk about like the clinical aspects of like, okay, here's like the anatomy, and you know, this is how it works, you know, and we don't want to just even talk about the fact that, you know, that there will be a certain time and place where it's okay to have sexual intimacy. But what we do want to do is make sure we talk about the sexual intimacy within the context of spiritual and emotional bonding that go with it, that sexual wholeness, and all the other intimacies, that this is meant to be a package deal, and God designed it.
Mm-hmm. Just as I've been kind of listening to you and this whole little time as you've been answering, it just really strikes me that we really do need to put more of a positive emphasis. We need to teach like all this stuff. There's so much good about it. And I don't think that, at least not on like a local level, I think the apostles are very good about teaching about it. Like there's some very amazing things that the apostles have said about how amazing this relationship in marriage can be. But like the local level, like the family, it's so hit or miss. And just as you've been talking, it's like I really think there should be so much more about all of this, about how amazing it is, about how sacred it is, about how I keep saying amazing, and there's not a better word I'm thinking of, but there really should be more of a focus on that. And I think also if we did that, rather than, yes, you need to know what will break the law of chastity, you need to know the don'ts, but that shouldn't be the focus. The focus should be on the other side of all the positives, all that you're going to gain from it, all that you can give from it, how much closer it makes you to God to have this relationship. And I think if we were to start doing that, like if I was taught that way, I wouldn't have been like terrified of the talk or whatever. Yeah. Because it's a whole different thing. When you're talking about how good something is and how much you want to be a part of it, what it will change, that's something that like draws you in. Whereas if you're just sitting there going, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, it's different. It's much different. And like I said, yes, you need to know that. You need to know you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage. You need to know you're not supposed to do these other things. But talking a lot more about all that's good about it. A bunch of stuff you shared, like, if everyone was doing this, I think there would be a big difference. Because personally, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but I think the reason so many people don't really care too much about chastity, they don't care about just being with this one person, sharing all the different kind of intimacies, I think it's because, well, one, we have a talk, like you said, it's not a frequent thing, but also because all they ever really hear is like the negative side of it, unless they're tuned into like high leaders in the church often. But if we start hearing the positive side of that, that gives such a greater reason. Like positive reinforcement always trumps negative reinforcement. At least I've seen that.
Yeah.
We need that. We need that. We need a reason to live it, not just to know that we shouldn't break it. We need a reason to live it.
Yeah.
And these type of things are what people need to hear. There's so much good about it, but I don't think we hear about it enough. I really don't think we hear about the good positives of it enough. Because if I look at it, I'm like, okay, if I am that close to someone, if I'm giving them everything emotionally, if I'm giving them everything physically, I'm giving them everything spiritually, if I can have that kind of relationship with someone, I'm not going to just go flippantly sleep with someone because it's so important. It's you're going to have a much greater reason than just, oh, you shouldn't do that. God said no. It's a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think we need that. What are your thoughts? Like, why do you think so many people just don't really care about it? Like, they don't care about being chaste as a whole. I mean, and I can't give you exact stats, but definitely more than 50% of people have had sex outside of marriage. Like, it's not an uncommon thing. It's actually more common than it is uncommon. So it's like, I'm curious, like, why do you think, I already kind of ranted about why I think, but like, why do you think it's so commonplace that people don't keep this chastity anymore? Like, why don't they do that anymore?
Yeah, and I'm sure the answer to that is probably complex, and
Yeah.
and I'm going to shortchange the answer to that, but I feel like you're right in the sense that the more we understand God's design behind it, the easier it will be for us to make a decision of what we really desire. Because I think that sometimes people will chafe when they hear about a rule or a law, right? But that's something that I think, as you grow in maturity, you start to recognize that there are certain realities or laws. Yeah, I gotta just finish this right now, okay? Yeah, sorry.
Must be a good dad if they always want you.
Anyway, yes. One of the things that I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes people, when we're less mature, will see a law as being something that restricts us. But as we start understanding the value of law, we start seeing that it actually gives us wings. That, if a law is good, and not all laws are created equal, like there's probably a hierarchy of laws, right? But the laws of God come from His wisdom and His perfect knowledge and His understanding. And so they are going to bring us to the highest happiness that exists in this universe, the highest fulfillment, the greatest joy that we could experience, and a completeness and a wholeness. And so I feel like that as we start recognizing that the laws of God make Him who He is, and they allow the kind of life that He lives, instead of saying like, oh, like I don't want to hear another law, we would hear like, oh, please, like he's teaching us the best ways to live, right?
Yeah.
The best ways to achieve what he has. And so we see them as great blessings, right? Instead of as barriers to our happiness. And that comes as we understand, as first off, we have to have enough trust in him to come know who he is, so that we can at least trust that, okay, he knows what he's talking about. I may not understand fully the reason for the law, but that I'm going to do it anyway. But as we exercise faith, often God will give us more. He'll give us more of the reason behind why he gave the law, right? Not always, right? Much of this life is a walk of faith, but there are many things that he's revealed, right? And so, for example, just one reason for me that I think is compelling, because I think you're right, the more that we understand reasons behind God's design, the easier it is for us to choose to align with those.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, one of the grand purposes of our happiness comes in the fact that we're social beings, right? That God, we're part of a much greater eternal family of intelligent beings. And when we're separated from each other, and that can happen not just physically, right? We're not always talking about proximity, but when we're separated from each other spiritually, emotionally, or physically, that we become miserable. And so when you understand that fundamental truth, that reality of the universe a little bit better, you start recognizing, okay, when we're really isolated, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually, that's a form of hell. That's a form of suffering. It brings misery. But when we're connected spiritually, emotionally, physically, like this is what, I mean, like the basic idea would be God's, first and second great commandment. We're to love God with all of our heart, might, mind, and strength, which kind of like has this idea of like, and with all our soul, right? The way it says it in the Old Testament. So this is kind of saying like, he's like, I want you to love me with everything you are. I want you to love me with your heart, your emotions, with your mind, your thinking, your best thinking, your ideas, your dreams, your desires. And I want you to love me with your effort and your energy, with your talents and, just your whole soul. And if you do that, you're going to find this oneness with me that will surpass all joy and all fulfillment that you could have in any other part of this universe, right? With any other experience. But he says, that's the first and great commandment. The second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Or in other words, to love them with all your heart, might, mind, and strength, to start that process of loving them the way that I love them, right? In another place, Jesus says, love them the way that I love them. And we know that that's what Elder Holland said is the first grand reality of the universe, is that God loves us with all of his heart, with all of his mind, with all of his strength. He loves us perfectly. And we're trying to learn that kind of love, because when we get isolated from that, or we get separated from that kind of love, it's a misery. And that's essentially what I think is lacking, because when we just say pornography is bad, what we're not explaining to our son or daughter, or to our friend, or to whoever it is that we're having this conversation with, is like these grand realities, that the fact that like you're shortchanging the experience. This is a counterfeit of what you could be experiencing, and the counterfeit is this: that you're settling for some type of a physical experience that's not connecting you to a real person emotionally and spiritually, and in many cases physically. And if it is it is physically, like a one-night stand or whatever it is, that this is again not the experience that God has designed. It's just like a little piece of it that ultimately is going to have an end, right? It's not built to be sustained. No good relationship is going to be built on this, right? Where it's like the investment is only like in this physical coming together, and then you never talk again. You never really connect again. You don't go through hard things. There's no real love there, right? There's no staying power in that. And so to have something be so powerful and good, but only for a moment, that's a mean joke. That's an awful joke.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's a deception from the adversary. And so to call pornography something, that pornographic experience something better than it is, to make it out to be something better is a deception. And so to have the more full, to bring in all of those aspects of sexual wholeness is a really important discussion, because we want to see things as they really are and as they really can be, and not just some little shriveled counterfeit, right, facade of what the reality could be, right? Mm-hmm. And call that the end all be all, right? That this is going to bring you some fulfillment, which is not going to be true. And the social science will back that up, right?
Yeah, I like that. It's something that kind of strikes me is that, because you talked a lot about how having faith in God, we need more of that. And it just kind of, it strikes me that maybe even if we don't understand everything, maybe if we don't understand all the reasons behind it, if we grow our faith in God and our trust in Him, maybe it'll make it easier to follow commandments even when we don't understand them, because we trust Him more. So I just kind of had that little thought. Maybe when we're having a hard time keeping a commandment, it isn't always about trying to figure out that a commandment, but maybe it's also just about building our trust in God, because we don't always know all the reasons why.
Sure.
So just kind of had that thought when you're talking about building faith and not knowing everything. But so we're talking about how amazing this is and how it should be. What would you say to the people that they want to have this but not as part of marriage? So like, for example, they say they're committed to just each other, but they don't want to be married. Like, why is that marriage? Why is that so important?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. In the sense that I think it's very, first off, I think that we probably need to acknowledge that someone that is drawn to that sexual relationship, that is the most natural thing in the world. And again, this is God-given, God-ordained, like this desire. Yeah. He implanted in all of His children, right? An attraction, a sexual attraction. And it's ultimately, to bring about, potentially at least, God's purposes in bringing family together, to have the oneness, the unity that God wants with us, with each other and with Him. And when people start looking at maybe alternatives, sexual alternatives, a lot of times it's coming from a good place, in the sense that, at least in part, let me see if I can clarify what I'm saying. Typically, when people get involved in some type of sin, it's usually because there's a deep unmet need that's happening in their life. Maybe they're going through something painful. Maybe they're going through something chronic that's difficult. Whatever it is, and because there's pain, some of the natural ways to deal with pain would come through, whether it's a substance, or whether it's sleep, or whether it's sex. You know what I mean? Like, there's this release, there's this something satisfying and wonderful that happens in those moments when when we're fulfilling a need. And because maybe some need in their life is not being fulfilled, they can at least have this need fulfilled, right? And it gives this moment of relief from the pain. But the person isn't bad, right? And the desire is actually good, but it's just misplaced.
Yeah.
Because it can't be sustained, and it's not in the right context, and it's not what it was designed to be. And so it's going to eventually lead to disappointment. It's going to be hollow compared to what it could be. And so when somebody is thinking to themselves, well, I'll just be happier in a relationship that's committed, right? You could have, two people that are cohabitating that could be very committed. You could have a boyfriend, girlfriend that could be very committed, and they may have several of those layers of intimacy. And so, for example, they may have sexual intimacy, and they might have emotional intimacy together. But what I think one of the things that they will definitely miss out on is that because marriage, we believe as Latter-day Saints that marriage is ordained of God. And I think many Christians would agree with that. Many other people of faith would agree with that, from their sacred texts, that God designs marriage. But from our particular belief, we have had to emphasize through, not only we believe ancient prophets, but modern prophets as well, that God wants to be part of that marriage. And if you can imagine, I can, as an example, I could try to say, I'm going to go through this life and I'm going to live a good life and I'm going to treat people well and I'm going to, be self-disciplined and I'm going to go do good in the world because I just have this inner sense that that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But I don't need God. I can have my own spirituality. I'm going to create my own laws. And I think there's probably a lot that a person could do to have a very fulfilled and meaningful life. But my faith is that God could make so much more of my life than I ever could if I include him in that process. Mm-hmm. And honestly, there's going to be some barriers that I'm going to run across that are going to be so much bigger than me. It'll be crushing without him. There's a scripture that says God is faithful. Sorry, this is Paul, and I got to back up. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. But he says, there's no temptation such as is common to man, right? That you've been beset with. This idea that everybody's going to be tempted in some normal, natural ways. It is the most natural thing to want to bond. That's a human drive that is as natural as anything, in this particular context. But we're going to be tempted in ways that are going to be very typical to human beings. But he says, there's no temptation that's taken you that's such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able, but will with the temptation make a way to escape. If I'm just trying to live this life on my own, my understanding and my experience is that I'm going to run across something that's going to be much bigger than me. You know what I mean? Whether it's, I cannot forgive my own sins.
Yeah.
As much as I can say, I'm going to numb my conscience, or I'm going to just say that never happened, or that doesn't matter. The reality of the universe that I'm living in, that I've experienced, is that there will come a misery that's deep-seated that I can't get rid of without God's help. And, eventually I'm going to die. I can't overcome that by myself. And I can't stop that for anybody I love, right? And there's other things that I think we face in life, whether it's our anxiety or our depression or, financial woes or whatever it is, but there's going to be challenges that just will seem overwhelming to us at some point. And if none of those seem overwhelming, eventually death will be the one that will be overwhelming. Like Pharaoh, he says, I can deal with all of these, plagues, but one thing he couldn't deal with is when he couldn't bring back his own son. Mm-hmm. Does this make sense? And so we're gonna get to a mortal limit. And if it's just you and your partner, there's gonna be there could be this season of great fun. There could be some season of great, maybe even joy. You could have joy in a season in your own, a marriage of your own making, all right? A connection of your own making, a relationship of your devising. But what we're leaving out is God.
Yeah.
And so, you know what I mean? The law of chastity is directing us to that God-designed marriage. Any other law or any other way is going to be something less, right? And again, even the law of chastity is surrounded by other laws that help it work. And we can talk more about that. But I don't know if that makes sense. That's one reason why I would say that a couple that's just cohabitating is good. I'm glad you're committed. And there are going to be some amazing blessings that come from that. But as one that has been married, and in that kind of covenant relationship, and to have God help us, I know he lives, and I know that he's doing things with us in our weakness that there's no way we could do by ourselves. Yeah. And has helped us through things that I just know we couldn't have overcome without him. And making us into something that I know he'll help us reach our full potential if we'll just stay with him, if we'll be faithful to him. So anyway, it's a long answer.
Yeah. So, and you can correct me, but I'm going to try to summarize everything I just heard.
Sure.
And kind of more or less what you're saying, obviously you said it a lot more eloquently, but more or less what you're saying is the reason marriage is so important is because God has said we should be married, and if we do it, he will be involved in the marriage.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
I think it's a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's huge. Because if that's why it is, that for me, that's all the answer I would need personally. It's like, okay, I can live with this person, be in love with them, or I can live with this person, love them, and get married, and God will be part of the marriage. That is a lot different.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not, and it's the cool part is he's like, not only am I going to be with you during this earth life to help you through all of the real challenges you're going to face. And I mean, that's the coolest promise, right? That God can consecrate our affliction for our gain. You cannot avoid affliction in this life, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, marriage is going to be full of it, right? And because it's so hard, it can be one of the hardest things on earth. But in order for that to bring out the greatest potential for joy, God needs to be involved, right? He can do more with like affliction than we can. And I'm a believer in that. But the cool part is that, like he says, not only are you going to improve this earth life, the relationship you can have here, and the peace that you can have together with me, but he says, I can perpetuate this forever. Mm-hmm. And that's just what a mortal cannot. You know what I mean? Like, you can make a covenant with another mortal of your own making. You know, like Jack and Annie, it's like, like, I believe the spirit goes on good. But like at some point, it's going to end, right? All earthly contracts are going to end. But God has this, he says, like, if you will follow my laws, he says, I can make this eternal. Like, this will perpetuate forever and continue to expand. And in fact, this is what makes me who I am, right? Like, this is my plan, is that you have this kind of, like, you can be added upon forever, right? That glory can be added upon your heads forever. Your family can grow forever. Your capacity to love a family can grow forever.
I guess there's kind of one question I'd probably want to wrap up on here.
Sure.
So don't keep you all night. And I'll kind of give a couple of my thoughts on after I ask it, because they're very short, and then you can just say whatever you're feeling. So the last question I kind of wanted to wrap up here on is, for those people who they're going to get married, like they know they're going to get married, they love each other, but they're really struggling with waiting until the marriage to have all those forms of intimacy. It's like, what would you tell those people that are just struggling to wait? Like, they're planning to be married, they're planning to be together, but what would you tell those people? And my two quick thoughts, and this is more or less reiterating a lot of stuff we've already said, but would just be, if you're really struggling to wait until you are married to this person, you really need to grow your faith and trust in God, and you really need to just learn the importance of this marriage, this binding. I mean, in our church specifically, it's even more of a big thing, because we believe that, like you mentioned, it's not going to end at this life. It's going to go further than this life. So doing it right is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like my quick thoughts of what I'd say if you're struggling to wait, because it's really hard to be around this person you're so crazy about. But like, what would you tell them? Maybe even like, because you're married, right? And I'm sure you were never tempted before you were married. But like, what would you say to those people they're really struggling? They're just like, I'm going to be with this person. I know I'm going to be with them. So is it really that bad that we are together before we actually get married? Like,
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
I would say for sure it is worth the wait. But I would also say that for the wait to matter, for the wait to actually sanctify us, to actually help us be a better person, we need Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Because in the wait, but in order for like even the wait to even matter, right? To actually say like, well, is it worth it to try to just put away like this way of living, you know what I mean? Or this way of thinking, and try to align with God and trying to move towards this committed relationship, this covenant relationship with God and with a spouse, that I'm all in and God's helping me along the way. To even start moving there, we're going to need Jesus Christ. And I think that this is where I know this is where there's all the hope in the world and that exists. And that is in Jesus Christ, because he can help us no matter where we're at to set things right, to learn what the actual, like the goodness and the beauty of that power and how it can actually be applied rightly, and to keep it within the bounds that God has set. Like he could help. He can do, like he is greater than that trap. He has the ability. He knows all things. He's the one that created our bodies. He knows how they operate and how how temptation can come into the picture. He was tempted in all points, but didn't get, and went through the entire length of every temptation, right? The entire breadth, the depth of every temptation. He knows how hard it is. But because of that, he says, I can run to and help those that are tempted. But without Jesus Christ, like we're not going to overcome this like the fallen disposition to misapply those powers to the things that just feel easy instead of what's right. That's going to bring the greatest blessing. And so Jesus Christ can not only help us to be forgiven of all mistakes, right? Including divorce, including pornography, including fornication, sex outside of marriage, all of those, or any number of other sexual transgressions, self-stimulation, whatever it is. He can help us not only be forgiven, but he can help us change. And if we just stayed with him long enough, like he's going to get us there. And the thing that we can't do is just give up on him, because that's our choice. Like he says in one sacrament song, he says, "Oh, be constant unto me, that thy Savior I may be." Mm-hmm. In other words, he's saying, if you will just stay with me, he says, I will save you. And so I would say, first off, you can be forgiven. When we have done wrong, we can set it right with his help. And that is on every level of going out of the bounds which he has set. But when we're in there, he can show us how to operate within those bounds in the way that he's designed, so that the full blessing can come. And so to be specific, I guess, just to finish with what I was saying, for that, first off, anybody who's waiting, it's worth it. Not only does the social science tell us that if you're sleeping around, if you're just trying to experiment to see if you're really satisfied, if you're trying to see if you have sexual chemistry, I'm going to try lots of partners and then I know what I really like. All of those experimenting, I'm just going to sow my wild oats, and then eventually I'll settle down with one person. All of those types of approaches tend to lead to less stable relationships and less sexual satisfaction in the long run. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we can wait, right? And if we haven't waited, if we can repent and wait, right? And stay with God, wait on the Lord, then his promises, not only can he forgive us and change us, but then he can show us the true beauty of intimacy, right? Not only that closeness with our spouse, with our husband or wife, but that closeness with him. Mm-hmm. And so there's all the hope in the entire world, and it's totally worth waiting for. And everything that God has told us is true. And the more as we have experience down here, and as we're doing the social science, we're realizing that this is true. And we don't need the social science to tell us what God is saying is right, but it's just cool to see that as people are looking into this seriously, they're starting to say like, oh yeah, God knew who he was talking about.
Starting to catch up.
But anyway, I just have such a respect for anybody who's trying and that will rely on Jesus Christ, because he's going to get them there.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So just really just relying on him to help you resist, basically. That's really simplifying it, but basically just
to keep things within the bounds he has set.
Yeah, when you are very tempted to be with this person you love before marriage, lean on the Lord more to receive that help to not given, basically, is kind of what I'm
to save that
Yeah.
that most special of all relationships for the place where God intended it.
Yeah, perfect. So I think, like I said, I'm sure we could talk about it more, but that's probably where we'll stop here for now. Just kind of wrap up here, and just in a minute or two, do you have any last thing you would want to say? Just something that's maybe just you really want to drive one specific. This is really important. Just in a minute or two here as we're wrapping up, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying that any of these thoughts are just from me, because I feel like all of us are learning here together, and other people have talked about this before I have, not only prophets, but other great thinkers and so forth. But you think about in the family proclamations of the world, when we choose to keep the law of chastity, this is a blessing not only to us, it's a blessing to our partner. My wife has a sense of safety and a sense of peace that can only come as I'm faithful to her. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. There's a sense of safety and peace that you can't trade for anything as she is faithful to me. But that extends to our children. Like, children in the family proclamation have a right to parents that honor marital vows with complete fidelity.
Yeah.
And you think about that. Your child they are the combination of your union, right? They're like this beautiful blend of your genetics, of your personalities, and like they've got their own stuff too, right? That are unique, that's totally unique from God, but they really are just like this symbol of everything that you have committed to each other, right? In like this most beautiful way. And they have a right to have a dad that loves the mom and the mom that loves the dad. And when that there's always, sometimes death happens, sometimes divorce happens, those kind of things. God has promised to compensate when those things happen, and to help them, people through when it's, these are the kinds of things of mortality that we can't always control. God has promised to be with us in those moments. Mm-hmm. But the gift we give to not only our spouse, but our children we can't put a price tag on it. And the happiness that we see in our children as they feel safe and they have a childhood, it's inestimable in its worth. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I would say, that I believe President James E. Faust, who was a member of the first presidency, when he said that there is a happiness in family life, and particularly in a happy marriage that extends to family life, that is 1,000 times greater than any other happiness. And it's not to say that there's not sorrow and difficulty that is also maybe just as challenging, right, at moments. But to have that potential for happiness, that potential for that kind of love, that's going to be in God's design. And the law of chastity protects it. So it's like my greatest gift is to have that law, right, within all the other laws that he's given us for our happiness. So I love it, and pray that I'll be faithful and grateful for Jesus Christ that helps us to keep that law, because we can't do it without him.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, probably just the last thing I would say is more or less just reiterating some things we've spoken of over this time, is just there needs to be a lot more talk. There needs to be a lot more teaching of this law, not simply once in a while or once in a life while you're at home. That there needs to be a lot more talk of it, and not just, oh, here are the things you shouldn't do, but here's why it's so important. Here's all the reasons. Here's how beautiful it is. Here's why God has set it up this way. And I think we just, when we are looking at this law, instead of it being some awkward taboo thing, it really should be something we're excited about, something we want to talk about, because of how amazing it is when we follow this law that God has given us.
Yeah.
So Thank you for being here, and thank you all who are watching. If you're liking it, like it, subscribe, comment, tell us what you think. You can flame me, don't flame him.
You can flame me too. I have my own set of challenges. It'll hopefully help me be a better person.
Yeah. And until next time, go out there and be a good boy or a good girl.